I'm not ready. I mean, I'm just here to keep things interesting. And to remind people, just in case they're talking while muted without realizing they're talking while muted. Okay. And we have 10 attendees, so that's nice. I think they can hear us now as well, maybe, possibly, probably.
I think so, yeah.
Hi, folks. We're just setting ourselves up onto the live stream on our Facebook pages. So just give us 1 second to make that whole thing, do the whole thing it's meant to be doing. And then we'll kick this whole thing off. I think we're now recording. So we're getting somewhere. I'm like frantically refreshing a Facebook page just so you all know that we are committed to making this work. In the meantime, everybody can, pour themselves their latest coffee and power through the last, hopefully, if you're in Eastern Canada, the last 3 hours of your Friday. And then you are hopefully looking forward to a nice long, not like a nice weekend. I don't think it's a long weekend, but it's a nice weekend. And we are now live on Facebook. Perfect. All right, shall we start this thing off, folks?
That sounds great.
Awesome. So first and foremost, thank you everyone for joining us today. We are thrilled to have a phenomenal set of panelists here, and what I am sure is also a phenomenal set of attendees. Our focus today is on everything shared decision-making in youth services, and we are very excited to hear from the phenomenal work of the team at Access Open Minds, who have really pioneered in this kind of work and wrote a really awesome paper saying and sharing everything about that work. Lisa and I are both here from Wisdom2Action. For folks who don't know, we are a progressive consulting firm and social enterprise that is kind of based out of Nova Scotia and Halifax, but we work across the country. And we are very honored to be, Lisa and I, acting as your moderators today, and are looking forward to a engaging discussion coming up. I'll now pass it over to Lisa to introduce herself and go through some of the housekeeping for today.
Great, thank you. My name is Lisa Lachance, and my pronouns are they and she, and I am based in Chibouctouc, Halifax, in the traditional unceded territory of Mi'kma'ki. In terms of housekeeping, so you might have seen as you joined that we are recording this, and it's also live on Facebook. We've encouraged our panelists to be as comfortable as possible in terms of they may have their cameras on or off at different points. We do have a Q&A planned at the end, but if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them in, and we'll make sure you get your answers. There is French-English interpretation available, and you'll see that with a little globe across the bottom of your Zoom interface. Et les questions en français sont toujours à la bienvenue, et nous pouvons vous répondre en anglais ou en français. Alors, c'est ça? Okay?
Perfect. Now, before we get much further into it, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that many of us are gathered here today on territory that is not our own, on territory that is the traditional unceded, unsurrendered, or treaty-guided land of Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis folks from across Turtle Island. I myself am joining today from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory in Ottawa, and I would encourage us all to reflect on the lands upon which we reside, the histories of those lands, the ongoing struggles of the First Peoples of those lands in resisting systemic colonialism and colonial violence in various forms that continue to this day, and to reflect on how in the work that we do in youth mental health, we can better center Indigenous voices, engage Indigenous communities, and do this work with a genuine commitment to solidarity and to a vision of this land where we are better to all peoples on this land. I encourage everybody to reflect on the lands that they reside and what a commitment to that land and those First Peoples looks like in practice. I would now like to pass it back over to Lisa, I believe.
Yes, great. Thank you. I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Vidya Iyer, who's going to provide some opening remarks. Dr. Iyer is a researcher and service provider, interested obviously in youth mental health and especially early intervention for psychosis in Canada and beyond. She is a researcher at the Douglas Hospital Research Center and an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry, McGill University. And these interests underpin her role as scientific clinical director of Access Open Minds. And she also brings to it a passion for ensuring family and youth engagement at all points in the mental health journey. And now I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Faye. It's really nice to be with you all on a Friday afternoon. Like, any opportunity to get together with people, even if it's by Zoom, is very welcome in these days of most of us working from home or being home and away from our usual social networks. So thank you for being here. We are, we do hope to keep it really informative but informal, and hopefully there'll be a lot of opportunity for discussion and conversation and dialogue, both today and an ongoing dialogue on shared decision making. I just thought that what the first thing I wanted to do was simply situate what we're talking about today in sort of a larger ideas around shared decision making. So shared decision making is really sort of a principle in what is called patient-centered care. And the idea was really that individuals, and in this case, we're talking about young people, have both the need, the ability, and I would say the right to be involved in participating in decisions that pertain to them. And it really did start with this idea that, the original sort of like some of the initial work was really around a doctor and a patient participating in shared decision making around choices around medications. But now it's well beyond that. It's more a principle that really informs the way care is provided, decisions are made about, and you'll hear that there can be shared decision making in various aspects of work that we do in youth mental health. And often people think that, oh, I do this work collaboratively anyways. But shared decision making was really something about going beyond this sort of idea of simple collaboration to actively operationalizing it. So what do you need to do to set up in terms of mechanisms or actions or communications or commitments to make shared decision making actionable? So I think it really goes beyond sort of this idea that commitment to collaboration is not equal to shared decision making. You really need to think about what is it that you need to put in practice, whether it is shared decision making with respect to services, with respect to services design or care or research. What do you need to do to make shared decision making real? And that's what we're really that's what we tried to do in the work that we've been doing in Access. That's what you'll hear about today. And I'm sure in your own spheres, you're probably doing a lot to try and bring this principle into reality as well. So we'd love to hear your ideas too. But that's kind of where it started. The only other thing I'd mention is that there is a lot of evidence, and certainly given the webinar format and the idea of making it a lot more practical and actionable, we're not going to go into the evidence, but there is a tremendous amount of evidence that shows that shared decision making really promotes better outcomes, better relationships between the provider and the patient, and in this case, between the people involved in making these decisions together. So this is also an evidence-based practice. It also is really based on this idea that multiple perspectives need to be taken into account in making decisions. So for instance, in the case of making a decision about treatment, certainly the psychologist or the provider might have more knowledge about the evidence about what works or what doesn't work and what options they have available in their own setting. But the young person comes in with a lot of knowledge about their own lived experience and also what their needs are, what their preferences are, and what their values are. And it is really important to provide some concrete ways to allow for two-way communication around this sort of shared knowledge about evidence with needs, preferences, values, and experiences in order to be able to make the best decision possible. So shared decision making is really going beyond collaboration to really acknowledge the sort of different sets of expertise and lived experiences that people bring in, and providing ways for this to inform decisions so that people can have the best possible, not only that they can have the best possible outcomes, but that their experience in that process is really the best quality possible. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to sort of pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for opening. And I think that's a really good grounding for us as we explore the details and get into it and talk about what shared decision making has looked like at Access and how you've got to where you are today. So I'm now going to give our wonderful panelists all a chance to introduce themselves. And so I would invite everyone to share their name, their pronouns if they like, what territory or land they are located on, and a little bit about like what role or title or work you're up to at Access. So I am going to put one of you on the spot, and I'll maybe ask Chantal if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Chantal Miro. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm calling in from Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I'm on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene Nations, and the heartland of the Métis people. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. I had the privilege of working for 4 years with Access Central Office as the Stakeholder and Partnership Engagement Coordinator until this past August. And that meant working hard with youth and family and Indigenous council members to name, identify, implement, and rethink strategies for shared decision making throughout our project, throughout Access Open Minds. So it's great to be able to talk through some of the nuts and bolts of our experience that went into this paper. And now I'm working more specifically with a homeless youth network in Montreal, downtown Montreal, called Ripage Montreal. And they are part of Access Open Minds. So I remain involved working with youth who have a lived mental health experience and homelessness experiences in a downtown center. And how do we really create space for vulnerable populations to inform decisions and be able to participate in their own mental health care? I think we see time and time again systems that exclude the most vulnerable. So I'm happy to be able to continue this work in a different setting.
I did this thing that I will probably do numerous times today, and I started speaking before unmuting myself, and that is just my way of reminding all of our panelists to not do the same. Maybe I'll pass it over to Sarah next, and Sarah, if you'd like to pass it along after, we'll go from there.
Sure thing, thank you. So my name is Sarah Jalali, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling in from Calgary, Alberta, which is the Treaty 7 territory in the Southern Alberta region. So I want to acknowledge that. My role in Access was for about 4 years, being a part of the Youth Council at the Access site in Edmonton at the University of Alberta, and also was involved with the National Youth Council at Access for that time as well. My role as co-chair for the Youth Council ended in April when I graduated from the University of Alberta. So right now I'm currently just in the role of being a National Youth Council member, and would love to still be in that role and continue in that role and doing what we do. Yeah, and aside from that, I'm currently just taking a gap year from university and then most likely going back to get a master's or into professional school. And I will pass it on to Chloe.
Hi, so I'm Chloe. I'm based in Montreal, which is the traditional land of the Kanawaki. So I have been working at Access Open Minds Central Office for almost 2 years, well, 2 years now. And I started off as a noise translation coordinator, and I've recently started doing stakeholder engagement as well. So I'm really excited to be here. I mean, we're going to talk a bit more about the process of writing, but it was a long process. The actual writing process was a process of shared decision making. So
I'm just really happy to be able to share this moment on a Friday afternoon, and yeah, talk about what we learned and more, discuss shared decision making.
Awesome. We also do have a wonderful hidden panelist in the name of Jimmy, who will be jumping in a couple times with some videos. He couldn't join us in person today, unfortunately, because life is doing what it is doing to all of us ever since that day in March. And so we all, but we do have a couple videos that we're excited to share when some key questions come along. I also do want to maybe give Lisa and I another chance to say hi, just because I don't think we actually said hi, and I don't think I gave Lisa a chance to say where she is based. So I'll pass over to Lisa.
I did let people know where I was based in Chibuktuk, Halifax, and I'm a principal consultant with Wisdom2Action. And I'm also a PhD candidate, actually working with Dr. Iyer and looking at some questions around integrated youth services. So I think at this point, I'm handing it over to Chloe. Before we get started, Chloe, would you mind sharing just a bit of background on Access Open Minds for folks who aren't as familiar, and sort of who you are and what you do as an organization?
Yeah, sure. So Access Open Minds is a 5-year research and evaluation project that is transforming youth mental health services across Canada. So it really came from a place of realizing and acknowledging that youth mental health services just weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like, they weren't adapted to youth. There's extremely long wait lists. And so it's a project that has a clinical aspect where there's 16 sites across Canada that are very diverse. So we have Indigenous sites, non-Indigenous sites, urban sites, rural sites, semi-urban sites, semi-rural. So a really diverse group of clinical sites that have all implemented this new way of doing youth mental health services. So going from services that really work in early identification, so making sure that we're identifying youth that are in need a lot earlier and that they know of the service, so they're reaching out for help a lot earlier, that the help's more accessible and more meaningful for them in spaces that are youth friendly. So just making services the way they should have always been. And alongside that is the research and evaluation piece. So evaluating that transformation, seeing whether it does actually lead to better outcomes for youth, for that community, for service providers. And then taking all of that knowledge, so through the transformation, the actual experience of implementing this new model, and just as a whole, the network, what we've learned through this process, and that's where knowledge translation comes in. So that's anything from publication that we did, from this panel, which is a lot more accessible way of sharing the information. But the last big component I wanted to finish with is youth and family engagement. So that is something that's been intertwined in all aspects of the project. So we have a youth council that Sarah is on. We also have a family and carers council, and they really are there to inform every step of the way to make sure that what we're doing is meaningful to them, meaningful to the youth that are actually at the sites in these communities. And that's where the concept of shared decision making comes in. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Chloe. I was once again struggling to find the unmute button. And now I'd like to, before we actually get into the paper itself and begin unpacking everything there, I did want to turn it over to Chantal to tell us a bit more about why Access decided to publish a piece on shared decision making. Like, what was it that made this something you really wanted to write about, and like how did this piece come together?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Faye. So I think Vidya and Chloe spoke to the importance of shared decision making in youth mental health settings and in research. We actually had it was Chloe who happened to find a great conference online as she worked through where could we be sharing knowledge. So we went last summer to present in Quebec City at Université de Laval. There is a body called the International Shared Decision Making Society. So clinicians and researchers, health researchers from around the world gathered in Quebec City. This is pre-COVID time, right, when we could gather. And we basically decided, well, let's throw in an abstract to this conference and see how it could come to be, how we could share our knowledge with this community, being that our values were in line with what this society was all about. So youth council members decided to contribute. That's when Sarah joined to write up this abstract. Yvonne Pelling from the Family and Carers Council contributed along with other members, and Chloe and myself and Vidya. We wrote up this abstract, got it in, and were accepted to present a workshop. So I think that came with mixed feelings. Maybe some nervousness in how to present in an academic setting to researchers. And through that workshop, we were invited to write up an article, a tutorial article, saying, how do we do this within Access? How do we do shared decision making? So it was quite an honor to receive that invitation. It was a lot of hard work to put our ideas into sentences, into paragraphs, and learning how to write an academic article. So a thank you to the International Shared Decision Making Society, to l'Université Laval, to the editor team of The Patient who guided us through this process in the midst of a pandemic, for their support in academic writing, and to attributed through Sarah and Yvonne their ideas to the paper. I think tooth and nail to say, let's put our ideas down on paper, because we can't be the only ones doing this. There must be other people who would want. We saw that in the room in Quebec City, that people were intrigued to learn from our work. We were also the only ones who were talking. That was another impetus for really getting this publication out and documenting the work of throughout these 4 years. So I think I'm rattling on a little bit. I just wanted, this is a reflection that I think, I'll speak from my perspective, that I've learned from different community members and from different jobs that come together. Vidya talked about building relationships, maintaining relationships, putting in place structures to promote shared decision making. And I think it starts with the team that you gather and who you are and the values that call you into action. So I also want to give a shout out to families and community members who helped me become who I am as a professional as well. As we gather all these experiences, right, these bundles of knowledge that we apply to our work. So we know that this was important. We had to get this message out there. We have a responsibility, I think, to share as a research project. What are we doing? What's working and what's not working, to inspire others to give it a shot and reach out to us to learn more.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think I'll turn it over to Lisa now.
Yep, thank you. So as you can hear, the work behind all of this was very intentional, and really a feeling that this was important learning to share to a diverse audience. And so now Sarah's going to start kicking us off by talking about the paper itself and sharing some of the key messages and learnings from her perspective in the paper.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So as previously mentioned, we wrote this paper because we thought that, well, we got the feedback that what we were sharing at the conference was super important and people wanted to learn more, and they really wanted to see how they can, go about shared decision making within their field of work and what they're doing. So in terms of the paper, what we provide in the paper is just examples of how Access Open Minds as a project has implemented shared decision-making processes, as well as like what challenges we've encountered in doing so. And the goal of it is to help others do the same and know what to do when hit with these challenges, basically. And so my perspective of being on Access is more from the youth perspective, of sharing my perspective as a youth and how I view mental health services, how I have been treated in the mental health services. And I always like to say that every youth is different and all the sites are super different as well. I come from the site of the University of Alberta, so the youth that we interact with there and the youth that are basically seeking out services there are different from other youth all over Canada. And so I do want to acknowledge that in that my perspective is although diverse, it doesn't encompass the diversity of perspectives that are out there. And so as a Access Youth Council member at the U of A, one of my primary goals was to just help bridge the gap that exists between decision makers regarding mental health services and the students, because a lot of the students believe that there exists a huge gap, and through Access we were able to do part of that. And I mean, the videos that we'll show you will help you a little bit understand that a little bit better. But one of the ways that we were able to do that is through friendly spaces and having our own space within the Students' Union building, where we could come together as youth and as Access brokers and social workers and discuss the changes that we would like to see within our own university. So I will let Vidya play the video of another Access Youth Council member, Jimmy, who has talked previously about friendly spaces, to help you understand a little bit more about that.
And the video, we're hoping it's not choppy, but we will all pray, and the audio usually seems to be coming through nicely. So we'll see if we can make it happen.
One of the ways where young people were involved in a clinical point of view was we had youth participate in the design of the Access Open Mind sites. What this meant was if you walk into one of the sites, the way it looked, the physical interior, had young people in the design. I remember visiting some of these sites and the colors of these walls, what was there physically, such as the sofas, the chairs, and at some of them even musical instruments such as pianos and guitars. That all had young people involved in the input and implementation. And in some of our communities, in particular the indigenous communities, we had to ensure that the sites were adapted to the local context. And in one of our communities, we transformed a local garage into an Access Open Mind Center. And this is a place where young people can come, learn how to fix snowmobiles, build igloos, learn how to hunt. And it was meant to be a space that was youth friendly and had young people design it from the start to the very end.
Thank you, Vidya, for that. So I think that video captures how different these spaces can look like. An example of our space at the university was that it was actually previously one of the student success centers. And so it wasn't really a place where students can come in to, work on projects and things like that, like other sites, but it was more so where students would come in whenever they're under stress. They could play games, just have a relaxing space where they don't have to focus so much on academics, and we're able to connect with other people. One great thing about this was that it was our space and we actually had keys to it. And I mentioned that because it was on university property in the Students' Union building. That is a very difficult thing to achieve, to give keys to students to spaces in a public university building. But we were able to do that, and I think that goes to show that how willing the university staff were to consider us as students as being on the same plane as them, and respecting our wishes and what we value. And this is one of the things that we have done. There were multiple things that each site has done for their specific needs and values. All of those vary, obviously. But that's a little bit about having youth perspectives come in and share decision making, is that you can build spaces for them that would benefit them, because a lot of times we could be thinking that something is helpful to some people when in reality it is not. So it's good to have that perspective come in. And I just wanted to end my talk with another video from Jimmy that I think helps explain why it's important to have sustainability in shared decision making, and how important it is to keep going. So I'll let Vidya share that as well.
Sorry. 1 second.
From a sustainability point of view, we have young people involved in very important capacity making decisions. And what I mean by this is they are involved in the research output and the products we produce from a knowledge translational point of view. Conferences, manuscripts, presenting at events like this. We have young people as co-authors and actively involved in that process. There are many conferences, local, provincial, national, even international, where we have young people involved in writing the abstract, the submission, and also as co-presenters, such as the conference you're seeing here today. And that is a way to acknowledge, hey, young people and their lived experience is a very important form of expertise. And we need to include that in the output that we create, such as conferences. Another example I like to give is a couple years back, there was an International Youth Mental Health Conference in Ireland, and we sent a team of young people to give an oral presentation and share our council's perspective to an international audience. And these are ways where we continue to have youth participate when it comes to capacity making and from a sustainability point of view.
So thank you, Vidya, for sharing that as well. And I would like to add as well to that, that we also were involved in the last year's International Shared or Youth Mental Health Conference in Brisbane, Australia. So Access has given youth many opportunities to go all around Canada and the world to share their perspectives.
That is awesome. I am jealous that you were in Australia. I just have to put that out there. It feels like it's warmer there than it is in Ottawa right now. So I'm also like, anywhere is better than where there's snow on the ground already. I do want to actually pause and see if any other folks on our panel have any other thoughts I'd like to add around the overall paper. And maybe if there's like a big thing that you took away from the experience or from the paper itself that you'd really like to share. So maybe we'll start with Chloe and then Sarah, bring it back to you at the end in case there's something, a big piece that you'd like to add as well there.
Yeah, so I think Chantal mentioned this, but one resounding thing that I took away from the conference where we initially presented was that mental health, and especially youth mental health, was pretty much absent. So there was a lot of researchers looking at occupational therapy and cancer and other types of diseases, but mental health just wasn't up there. So I think that just reiterated how important it was to really start talking about shared decision making in the youth mental health world. And on top of that, when we started looking into the literature that existed to start writing this publication, we also realized that a lot of shared decision-making work had been done around more clinical type settings. So really about the relationship between a healthcare worker and a youth and their family and carers. And what we did through this paper is, because Access is such a big project that has many moving parts, we were able to talk about shared decision-making in research, in governance, in operations, in capacity building, in knowledge translation. So I feel like it just shows that it's so important to really be implementing shared decision-making in all aspects of the project, because that's how you get to a point where it's done organically and it's meaningful. So I think for me, that was the most important learning of the whole process, realizing that it's still quite a new field and not much has been done in it. Yeah.
Oh, that is awesome. Vidya, would you like to go next?
Sure, if I can just sort of build on what Chloe said. One of the facilitating factors that's kind of important to mention is that we were funded as the first strategy for patient-oriented research network. So it was at that time a new initiative from CIHR, which again, going to what Chloe was saying earlier, like things should always have been done this way. But the idea with SPORE was that everyone who's a stakeholder should be on the table. So especially patients, patient partners, families, service providers, decision makers, researchers, and that they should really be coming together to make decisions and implement changes and see how systems can be transformed for better outcomes. And it's interesting because I do think that that provided kind of, by putting people together and saying, hey, you have to work, and this is a project. So as a project, we had principal applicants who were researchers. Usually it's always researchers, but so you had principal applicants who were youth, who were families, who were members of community organizations, researchers. So it already provided a foundation for having to think differently. So that's the one thing. The second is, as we first started, it was kind of not clear to me how thinking about shared decision making as a project, so learning to work together between these different stakeholders, would then influence how shared decision making would happen in services as they were planning design of services that would work differently and that would be more suited to the preferences of young people, and how those two would then actually link to an experience of shared decision making and promoting more of that for individual young people and families who are walking in. I still couldn't quite see the links. I saw those as separate. The one sort of biggest learning for me has been that you cannot start at one level. You really do need to see this as something that is a thread that ties everything together. And it's incredible how each piece feeds into the other and catalyzes the other. So thinking about the project as a shared project, thinking about each space as a shared, and then each interaction and each encounter, and all of those are linked to each other. So, so for instance, by bringing these people together, decisions, for example, that young people would be part of hiring decisions at sites. So that's pretty transformative in terms of shared decision making around hiring. By hiring people and people coming into teams where they were hired not by one administrator, by a team of like young people and families, they knew who they were really being hired to work with. And they knew that shared decision making had to become very much part of who they were. So for me, the biggest lesson has been that sometimes when you start these things, you can't see the links, but you really need to commit to a principle. And then that principle then is something that you will see in different aspects, and you don't know the chain reactions that you will start off. Like, so you just need to be open to actually committing to principles rather than one or two concrete practices, because those organically just evolve and more opportunities come for that.
Oh, that is amazing. Thank you so much. And maybe Chantal, would you like to go next? Oh, I think.
Sure. I'll try to add, not. Can you hear me?
You are coming through quite choppy, and your video does seem to be frozen. I might suggest turning off your camera for the moment and just jumping in with your audio.
Okay, so I'll turn my camera off, and maybe that helps so that you can hear me. I'm not sure what's going on, but I think, anyway, okay, we'll continue here.
You are now good. You are now good, Chantal, just so you know. Your audio is good. You're coming through fine.
Okay, that's great to know. So I think access has been a long learning journey. And like Vidya mentioned, it started with a principle. I think it was facilitated by how we were funded as a patient partner, patient-oriented research project. So already there was this expectation that we do things differently through TRAM. And I think for me, a big learning was, well, how do you do things differently? Everyone's version of what works and what doesn't work is different. So like Vidya mentioned, coming down to the principle and developing a set of values and building relationships so that we can work together as a network and navigate those challenges together as a network. I think in order to identify strategies that will work, those relationships need to be in place so that we can actually listen to each other and co-create. So in the paper, you'll see some great examples like this hiring motion that was implemented by the executive, like these decisions that Sarah and Jimmy mentioned around youth spaces in different communities, but also around consent forms for research. also around what a research protocol could look like. So I think those kinds of examples give us goosebumps. We're thinking differently about how to do research with young people, with families and carers, alongside clinicians and researchers and decision makers. And it will become challenging. So in the paper, we look at, you know, the power dynamics and how do you start shifting power dynamics. And Jimmy mentioned building capacity. So I think even leading up to a conference presentation, capacity building is a thread that needs to be woven throughout a project so that there are mutual learnings and that we can support each other in sharing different forms of wisdom. And I think the principle of Access was that we acknowledge different types of wisdom and knowledge, that they are equally important in order to inform what we're doing across Canada. So those power dynamics are and remain a challenge that need to be addressed. And I think one strategy to navigating that is establishing relationships between us so that we can have those harder conversations in a respectful way. You'll also be able to read about the challenge of pace and timing and deadlines. And through our work in the 4 years that I was there, this is a challenge, right? Because we know funders need results quickly. We know that such a momentous change takes time to put into practice, right? If we want to have evidence-informed practices that are guided through conversations with stakeholders, well, that takes a lot of time. So how do we negotiate that? And I think that's where we need to be brave and challenge some of the power structures to say that, yeah, we do need more time, and how can we negotiate that together? So some of that was put into place through quorums at meetings to say that if youth and family are not able to attend the meeting, that we all agree that we won't have the meeting, because it might be convenient to have it at 9 to 5, but for youth and family, they may have other obligations, and we respect that as a network. So we'll put that on hold, and we value their perspective enough to say, let's slow this down a bit. It might mean a lot of behind the scenes work, and I've spoken with other people who work in integrated youth services, and we talk about the invisibility of that work, that we are in such a results-driven society, but results take time, and this work, building relationships, is invisible, right? So how can we bring accountability to relationship building? And I think we might be able to draw from some qualitative research strategies to continue to bring that to the forefront. So those were my more exciting parts of the paper. I think was really, as this team of authors, we got together to say, okay, how did we address these challenges, right? And I could name one thing from my perspective, but from Vidya's perspective, or Yvonne's and Sarah's and Dr. Mala's and Chloe's, right? All of our perspectives came and really helped document how do we navigate that challenge. And by all means, we don't have all the answers. I think this paper is the beginning to help lay some groundwork if you're willing to start shaking things up in your organization and challenging those power structures to put some real robust strategies in place.
Oh, thank you so much, Chantal. There's some pieces there that I really resonated with me. I think the piece around power sharing in a big way, I think that's one of the things that we don't talk enough about in youth engagement, or like community connected or community-based services, is that the power sharing is actually hard for a lot of folks, and it's hard to adapt to working in a practice where you actually have to take time and reflect and make sure you have the relationships so that you can do this work in a way that does justice to the communities that you serve. And I think that also, in a time when we're talking so much about equity in like very powerful and good ways, I think there are like solutions and opportunities opened up through a real like genuine commitment to shared decision making, both when it comes to like young folks in particular, but also when it comes to all kinds of communities that are traditionally not afforded access to those spaces. And I think even if we can learn this practice, even around sharing power with young folks, like that skill, the knowledge we take as providers or individuals, that ability to say, actually, we need to share and like acknowledge the power dynamic here, find ways to shift them, create the relationships that let us work with those folks who might have less power in relation to us. Like those learnings and the learnings from this work, I think, have implications across sectors in some really, really amazing ways. But maybe before we move on, I do want to, Sarah, give you a last second if you do have a few thoughts on like your biggest takeaway or what you really hope resonated most with folks. I'll pass it back to you.
For sure, thanks. So I guess my biggest takeaway, and I think people have touched on this previously, was you know, how much, basically how lacking it is in like shared decision-making processes when you're discussing youth mental health and shared decision-making in that process. And as someone with a neuroscience background, I do understand some of the thought processes behind that and how shared decision-making can be difficult in those situations. But I do still believe that it's very important. And that's why I believe the work that we're doing is so amazing and important, because it's one of the only ones out there that is taking this strides in that field. And so it was really interesting for me to see how much clinicians are implementing shared decision-making strategies at the conference, but also a little bit upsetting to see that it was very much focused on other aspects of health and not so much mental health. And that's why I think our project is super important. And that's all I kind of want to say about that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone. So we're going to let the panelists go around one more time and then open it up to questions and answers. And if you feel like I do, that we're just starting to scrape the surface around these issues, that's okay, because guess what? There's going to be a part 2 to this workshop. And so you have to all come back and learn more about actually implementing shared decision-making in different contexts. So we're going to sort of just nudge a little bit into the implementation questions. So we're just gonna give you a little teaser, but again, you have to come back for part 2. So we'll go around again and ask the panelists sort of what's top of mind for you in terms of moving this forward. So how do you hope this paper will impact shared decision-making? And how do you think other organizations can be influenced to implement these types of processes and principles? So perhaps I will start with, I can't remember who started last time, so I'll start with Chloe this time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, some great stuff being said. And as you said, I feel like we're just starting, and it just goes to show when you give space for this kind of discussion, there's just so much to be said. But I guess in terms of, hopes for the future and how this can really help encourage other initiatives to implement shared decision-making practices. I feel and this is not in the paper, that's why I'm really excited that we have this, but it's really just saying that it is possible. And it's true that it does take more time, and it takes flexibility, and it takes re-questioning even ourselves as we work in this project. Like, am I doing my job the best way I can, and respecting these values and making sure I am opening up these opportunities? Youth, for example, who are at school or at work, like if I try and call you at 3 p.m, you're probably not going to be available, right? So it takes, courage and really wanting to change the way you do things, but it's possible, and it's just so rewarding. Like I'm so grateful to have been able to co-write, co-create, co-develop this paper and work in a project that really does this organically. And as we said, we have youth and family on our hiring panels. And I think it means that the people working in this project, we're all here for the same reasons. And it's just really lovely to be part of a team where everyone's here because they want to do things better. So yeah, I think my takeaway is putting that kind of seed of hope and motivation to say that it is possible, and it's meaningful, and it's completely worth the work.
All right, thank you so much. And so now I'll go to Chantel.
Sure, I think I can echo what Chloe's saying, that, my expectation is that it does plant this little seed of hope. And I think also, it sounds cheesy, but I remember when we started in Access, we felt like this was such a momentous task. And it felt like it was a very challenging and innovating task. And I kind of wondered, as stakeholder engagement coordinator, well, who can I learn from? Who's doing this? And I think if we start reflecting on ways that shared decision making is already implemented in different healthcare settings or in different research settings, in community settings as well, if we look to Indigenous communities or other communities who have been doing this very organically, I think there's a lot of hope out there for wanting to do things differently and seeing a way forward to do so. So I would challenge folks who are interested in this to reach out to whomever they think might have some experience, perhaps expertise, but I think we all have an experience and a desire to learn from one another. So that, I think, is really important, to realize that you're not alone when you want to do things differently, and it helps chip away maybe at some of that anxiety or an imposter syndrome, or this thought that it really is a momentous task. And I remember reading about shared decision making and different community engagement literature as well, and hearing how messy this is, how messy it is. And I think if we focus on the bottom line, right, beyond messiness, well, why are we doing this? And then we can stay anchored in what our mandates are, and the bigger picture, which is the well-being of young people in our communities. And that's where we see the way forward, and we're able to continue to drive change in our community settings. And beyond. So I think I would, those would be my hopes with that, are that we keep up the hard work and keep creating opportunities for change in our communities, turning to young people as leaders and supporting them in their capacity to be leaders and informed. Often what I see is that for shared decision making to occur, there needs to be mutual learning. And are we putting the resources and the supports in place to foster that learning, taking the time to build capacity? Otherwise, we're only, I think, repeating previous errors and then saying that people aren't capable. But if we do invest in people, in learning, in training for everyone, for researchers, youth, family, and operational staff, then I think there is a very optimistic way forward that could happen very quickly with the right resources and supports in place. So I'll zip my lips on that one. I'm curious to see more, but those are my top of the iceberg.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said really sort of links to how Vidya started in terms of talking about it as a principle. And then as well, I think that your comment about learning from each other. And yeah, so for those of you who may not know, I've been kind of like hanging out with the Access Open Minds Network since the beginning in various different ways. I think time and time again, the value of having a network in which to learn and share was just repeated and repeated and repeated. So I think that, makes it a lot of sense why you've been able to bring this together, and also why it's important for the network to bring it together.
Can I just jump in, Lisa, to make a joke? Because everything, I was like, it sounds like you're fangirling for Access, and now you're getting your PhD literally in integrated services.
I know, I am fangirling.
It's mutual.
I think they genuinely deserve it. So.
I should have made some big signs that go behind me that say "Yay, IYS." So I think Sarah, you're next, and then I'll pass it to Vidya to finish up before our question and answer. Although we might be a little bit over time, but see how we're going.
Yeah, sure. So I think my thoughts are the same as Chloe and Chantal. They mentioned pretty much everything that I would have wanted to talk about. I also hope, my hopes for what comes out of this paper is that I hope that the reader who is reading it, they do start questioning the way that research currently is happening, and the ways that most systems are working. And I hope that it encourages them to strive to make some changes in those processes and work towards implementing more shared decision-making strategies.
Great, thank you. And so Vidya, would you mind wrapping up this question before we open up the Q&A?
Sure, I think I'll echo a lot of what has already been shared. The one thing I will sort of add to that is it is a continuous process of learning, and perhaps we shouldn't get caught up maybe with terminology. So early on, when we were still figuring out how to work, and sometimes we struggled with how to do this. And at one point we had, this is important to acknowledge too, I remember once we had an in-person executive meeting, and we had someone, Alex McComber, who facilitated that meeting. And he is a community researcher. He's also from the Bear Clan Mohawk. And I learned a lot about how to facilitate shared decision making in group environments from him, because the way we did the entire 2-day meeting was everyone, you couldn't just speak up out of like, if you wanted to say something, you would write your name down, and then it's almost like the same thing like a talking stick. But it was so, and people would be saying things and you're getting excited and you want to react, but you can't. Your turn will come, and by the time your turn comes, you've heard so many diverse perspectives. You've had a chance to reflect and calm down. And it was a very simple strategy, but it taught me a lot about how in a group with diverse stakeholders. And by the end of the 2 days, we were really getting along, making decisions together. And that's not to say we weren't, but it was really a simple practice that he really said came from sharing circles and the kind of work he was doing and that he's been doing for a long time in Kanawake. And maybe it's not called shared decision making, but it's the same principle of commitment to sharing and listening and making decisions collectively and together. So it'll be nice if this is the beginning of sharing more and more ideas about how to do this and learning from diverse contexts, irrespective of whether we call it quote unquote like shared decision making. It's really important, I find, sometimes to not get caught with technical terms, because I do find that many communities might be doing it, but might not be calling it what journals call it or what people call it. And that's really something that resonated with me early on in this project's experience.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's also, it shows that like this practice is innovative, it is groundbreaking and new, but it's also something that we know how to do. It's something that communities and organizations have done. And I think there's tons of like grassroots innovations that probably like in practice function very similar to Access, but they don't use the same language, and it's just a way that worked and a way that worked well. And I think that's a really, also a useful way to frame it to people who are new to this. It's not something they don't know how to do. It's just doing what we know how to do in a different way. So that is phenomenal. I do want to give a moment for everyone to, or for anybody to ask questions in a sec, but before that, do want to thank our phenomenal panelists for all of their contributions and thoughts so far. I think that we have heard everything, like so much about what shared decision making can look like, could look like. I think I've taken a lot of new learnings around, really orienting ourselves around a principle and thinking of shared decision making as a principle that isn't just about one practice, but about ingraining it in every practice. And that as the potential for sharing power and learning and growing and improving our services, I think is phenomenal to stick with us. So thank you all so much. And now maybe we will pause and see if folks in the audience have any questions. You're welcome to type into the Facebook Live or to type into the Q&A feature that you should have available on here if you are joining us on Zoom. So I'll give folks about 30 seconds to jump in with any questions, and then we can go from there. And I think we actually do have a couple questions that we, as Lisa and I, would love to ask folks, but we'll play it by ear in our next 2 minutes. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come in. I think you all just brilliantly answered every question somebody could actually have around shared decision making. So maybe what we'll do is we did want to keep this relatively brief, just to give everyone like a sneak peek into the nuggets of gold within the shared decision making paper. I do want to pause to maybe hype up what is coming next. So this is the first step in a two-step process. The first piece was everything about the paper itself. The second piece is, oh Lord, like where do you go from here? And so in that stage, we're going to get into the implementation a bit more by bringing together some folks who have done the shared decision-making work in different kinds of spaces, from research to capacity building to service delivery. And we're very excited for that. And I'm trying to remember, Chloe, if we have a date confirmed. And if, okay, so we will be in touch with everybody following this panel, and there will be some separate promo for the second stage We just want to make sure we give it time for this whole process to enumerate, soak into your brains, and soak into hopefully some parts of your practice, and then give some more practical pieces a few weeks down from now. I'm going to pause now, and is there any final comments or things that I have forgotten from my wonderful panelists or from you, Lisa? Okay, so maybe I will say once more, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Access for making this whole thing happen. Thank you to our participants for joining us on a Friday. I hope you all have a weekend off and enjoy your weekend off. And thank you all. Have a wonderful day.